ask you fellas a question. Really ever since Michael Eisner proceeded with purchasing the Muppets, Disney has had a really difficult time gaining any kind of traction with these characters. I mean, it's been through the Michael Eisner era, through the Bob Iger era, and we're too soon into the Chapek era to really know. Yeah. But it's been attempt after attempt after attempt after attempt. I mean, Michael Eisner, he rebooted the Muppet Show on ABC. I think he had a Wizard of Oz special with the ABC with the Muppets on ABC at one point. Bob Iger tried multiple times with the feature films, that kind of like that reality office style Muppet show that he had on ABC kind of a few years ago. They've recently released something on Disney Plus called Muppets Now, but nothing ever really caught, you know? Do you guys think, and I'll start with you, George, do you think that maybe the Muppets are sort of stuck in time? Because there are franchises that are stuck in time. He-Man is something that will, in my opinion, will never be as popular as it was when it was in the 80s. G.I. Joe is another thing. It's stuck in the 80s. It'll never be as big as it was in the 80s. Are the Muppets that kind of franchise where it worked in that one perfect piece of time, the 70s and 80s, but now it's sort of like there's nothing they can do to kind of make them relevant again? Or do you think it's just Disney's dropping the ball?
No, I really think no matter what happened with the Muppets, whether Disney bought them, whether Warner Brothers bought them, whether Nickelodeon bought them, you know, I think it's just one of those things that the Muppets, I think, is basically they're placed in a time capsule and they're just sitting there, and that capsule was from the 70s and the 80s. And back in that time era, that was like the best thing since white bread, you know, because it's something new. It was something fresh. I mean, today's time, you know, kids are so into like the technological of CGI and everything. Right. Like kids aren't going to go back to, and I hate to use this term, but of like cloth hand puppets, you know, it's just not in that time era that it draws to the audience of today. For us, it does. I love the Muppets because I grew up with that. That was the nostalgic time of saying, okay, me sitting in front of my TV, watching the Muppet Show, watching the original Muppet movie, watching the Great Muppet Caper. You know, it was, and even into the 90s. I mean, with the Muppet Christmas Carol and Muppet Treasure Island, I went to go see Muppet Treasure Island in theaters. So it was like, it was just one of those things that the Muppets carried with me as I gotten older, because I was in that time frame where it caught on to my attention at a young age. Now, I hate to say it. I mean, I could play taps to this saying. I was say, my son isn't a big Muppet fan. I've tried. I've put on several movies. It just doesn't. The correlation is just not there for him, and I think and that's where I kind of sit back and I say, okay, well, it's not just him, it's his generation. And I think no matter how they try to keep the Muppets relevant, no matter how they try to bring them into today's time, I just think that it worked back then. And I would say leave it at that. Still keep them alive of what they did in the past, but I really can't foresee anything new that they could make that will be widely successful, minus the 2011 film, because they were absent for how many years. You know, for me, when I went to go see the new Muppet film, 85 to 90% of the audience were adults. They were my age when I went to go see the Muppets in 2011. I mean, there were a few kids, but it was basically, again, our era of people that say, hey, the Muppets are back, let's go see them. And I think after that, that's where it hit its peak. And I don't think they could, unfortunately, I really don't think that they still could make stuff very subtle, but I don't think it's going to be successful as much as they want it to be.
Well, they've tried a lot over the years, and in multiple Disney executive regimes, so to speak, whether it be Bob Iger, who tried multiple times to resurrect the relevancy of the Muppets, Michael Eisner tried.
Yeah, if it
They
was like,
definitely have tried. I mean,
yeah,
you know,
right, exactly. Yeah, I think if they just kind of bought them and they just kind of put them on the shelf and say, "Oh, we just own the Muppets," that then I can say, okay, Disney wasn't putting their best foot forward.
yeah.
But I mean, it's
They put a lot of stuff out. Considering how not well the stuff does, what do you think, Dre? Is it a franchise stuck in the 70s and 80s, or is Disney missing the mark here where there's an untapped potential with the Muppets?
It's a very interesting story with the Muppets. I think Michael Eisner, I think he liked the Muppets, but he really wanted to do business with Jim Henson. He really
Right.
wanted to have that working relationship with him going forward,
Interesting.
and knew that the Muppets, as popular characters as they were at that time, that this working relationship with Jim Henson was much more valuable. And when Jim died, it was like, man, now who gets to shepherd this? And that's really been the question ever since. And especially in Bob Iger's era, where you acquire stuff like Marvel and Star Wars, it's like, who's left to work on the Muppets? It's like the company's spread out as thin as it is, and it really has been kind of all the big talent centers have been assigned to these other kind of studios and franchises, and there's not really anybody left to shepherd the Muppets themselves. That being said, I think Bob Iger, it's like, okay, we'll give the old college try, but this was kind of really my predecessor's thing and not necessarily my own. And so we'll try to get it to work, but every single time they dip their toe into that pool, it's like they don't get the returns that everybody kind of internally says, oh man, this is great, this is good stuff, people are going to love this, and they just aren't rewarded for it. So I think it is one of those things, like George was alluding to. I think it is one of those things that's kind of caught in that time period. That's kind of caught, it's got a lot of nostalgia to it. But as far as working in the modern era with the kind of audiences that really kind of have to take this on, maybe the 7 to, I don't know, 12 kind of demographic, or kind of, it just doesn't hit in the same way that it did before. So I don't know, maybe it is stuck in time.